This evening railway travels through the southeast of Brazil. From Sao Paulo, we'll work our way inland through the state that bears the same name. In the province of Paraná, we'll make our way to the coast. Sao Paulo City was founded in 1554 by Jesuit priests. At that time, the city was insignificant, but over the centuries it developed into the thriving center of the Brazilian economy. This New York of the tropics is not only the biggest and most modern city of Brazil, but also that of the whole South American continent. The underground station, Estacio da Luz, is an important junction in the urban commuter system. Every day, millions of people use the subway system, known as one of the best in the world. From here, our commuter train will depart and take us to the main station of the city. Pretty soon, the glamorous office buildings give way to simple flats. Every day, Sao Paulo expands outward. Today, the city holds as many as 17 million inhabitants. With an unceasing stream of migrants from the poorer parts of Brazil, the number rises every year by the millions. By the year 2005, a population of 25 million inhabitants is expected. Now we're approaching the main station of Sao Paulo, a modern building. This is a starting point not only for national and international trains, but also bus terminals and a subway station are located here as well. Here we change for our first Brazilian fast train. Our first destination is Brotas, a small village 270 kilometers north of Sao Paulo. The route we're following is part of an old section that led from Sao Paulo to the Bolivian border. Unfortunately, this section, one of the most beautiful in the country, cannot be traveled at one go. But on the sections where it's possible to travel, the train is a popular and cheap means of transportation, especially for the local population. The first Brazilian railways were built at the end of the 19th century. They gave an enormous stimulus to the economic development of Sao Paulo. In those days, Sao Paulo was the center of one of the largest coffee-growing areas. Thanks to the railway, coffee became the #1 export of the country, and it made Sao Paulo one of the most prosperous cities. During the coffee boom, Brotas Station was the end of the line for many European immigrants who went to work on the surrounding plantations. With the market crash in 1929, Brazilian coffee exports came to an end, and many people moved to the cities. Brotas slipped into being a quiet town, but nowadays it holds as many as 17,000 inhabitants. Their main sources of income are ecotourism, fruit growing, and cattle breeding. Life in Brotas revolves around the water. The river Jacaré-Pepira not only provides this small town with a moist, fertile soil, but also supplies energy and, very importantly, attracts many aquatic sports fans. Besides fishing, canoeing, and water skiing, adventurous waterfall jumping is especially popular. One of our crew members climbs the ropes, always searching for adventure. He leaves for the descent of several very wet meters and is clearly not bothered at all with any fear of heights. The precipice is high and slippery, but our colleague is still calm and clear in his attention. A terrific descent, but duty calls, so we have to move on. We want to go to the potters of Barra Bonita, a small town 60 kilometers further on. Music, yes, of course. The Brazilians are the most musical people in the world. There's playing, dancing, and singing everywhere. In Brazil, 25 million people live in the slums, 12 million children live out on the streets, and 7 out of 10 inhabitants of Brazil are reduced to poverty. In this existence, with every day a survival of the fittest, it is music that binds them together. Our train does not go all the way to Barra Bonita, so we'll take our car to cover the last 20 kilometers. We leave the train on the desolate but very lovely station of João. One of the most important tourist attractions of Barra Bonita is the lake, which bears the same name as the town and empties into the Tietê River. Many potters have now established themselves here on the banks, where once stood the ships of the Bandeirantes. In the 17th and 18th century, they were the slave traders who searched the hinterland for Indians. Brazil was one of the last countries to end the slave trade, ending finally in 1888. Nowadays, Barra Bonita's sources of income are mainly from tourism and the production of sugar, alcohol, and pottery. The pots are still handcrafted. The workshops are worth seeing and therefore often visited. Late in the afternoon, we leave for São José dos Campos by car. From here, we will be leaving for our next train route. At the station of Sao José dos Campos, old pictures show us several trains from the 19th century. They were a part of the historic train route that tourists nowadays can travel in an authentic and carefully restored train. Of course, we'll also be boarding this train, and it turns out that we're not the only ones. The historical route takes us from São José dos Campos, north 80 kilometers, to Campos do Jordão. Campos do Jordão is situated at the north border of the state Sao Paulo, in the mountains of Mantiqueira. Up until the middle of the 20th century, it was an important health resort with 14 sanatoriums. The railway was built to make it easier to reach this small mountain village and was the initiative of one of the doctors of the resort. It was finished in 1914. On the way, the train pauses, and we have to change to a more modern version because the old train is no longer able to climb the steep mountain in this section. Slowly the train climbs into the beautiful mountains of Mantiqueira, this time transporting tourists of Sao Paulo. Because of the height, we have a superb view over the extensive mountain terrain. But there's some mechanical trouble ahead, and we're able to enjoy this view a little longer than planned. With a special telephone, they try to connect with a mechanic in the nearest village. Situations like this are not uncommon in Brazil and stem from a lack of funds for the national railway. There's never quite enough money for maintaining and refurbishing the trains and the rails. In Brazil, more and more sections are being closed, at the same time that other countries heavily invest in railway development. Only a small part of the 30,000 kilometers of rail in Brazil is for the use of passenger trains. Trains that are in use today on a given route may disappear next year. This gives us all the more reason to enjoy our trip, even if it's a little uncertain how far we'll get. We waited for 3 hours, but then finally the mechanic gives us the go-ahead. After all that, we arrive in Campos do Jordão in a relatively short time. At the end of the 19th century, Campos do Jordão developed into a health spa, taking advantage of the 1,700-meter altitude. In the 1930s, well-to-do inhabitants of Sao Paulo city discovered this environment as the perfect place for their holiday retreats. As a result, Campos changed from being a quiet health spa into being a popular tourist resort. The only thing that marks those former days is the building style that was copied from Swiss health spas. Now it's time for our next train journey through the state of Paraná. We'll leave from the capital city, Curitiba, for Paranagua on the Atlantic coast. Curitiba is a lively, beautiful town. Despite a rapid economic growth and related modernization, the town has managed to keep its historical character. They invest a lot of money in the restoration and maintenance of the old buildings, such as this neo-Gothic cathedral. Historic as well as modern architecture is important for the growing number of tourists visiting Curitiba. A fabulous example of contemporary building style is the glass pavilion of the Botanical Gardens, built in 1991. The Botanical Museum is one of the leading research centers of Latin America and holds an enormous collection of all kinds of plants. Nowhere in the world is there a variety of plants as rich and varied as in Brazil, so this is not surprising. The extensive collection of orchids is unique. We end our visit to Curitiba with an inspection of the theater, which since 1992 has been the architectural pride of the town. The theater is well integrated into the environment, which pours in through the walls of glass. The tube-shaped metal construction is a spectacle in itself and gave the theater its name, Opera de Arame, translated literally as Opera of Wire. Back at the station of Curitiba, we head for the most spectacular train route of our Brazilian expedition, the Serra Verde Express. We descend from the mountain plateau where Curitiba is situated to the Atlantic coastal city of Paranagua. This is a route of 110 kilometers. The Serra Verde Express is one of the highlights for tourists in the state of Paraná. Besides the regular passenger train called the Trem, there is also a special train for tourists called a Litorina. We will take the latter, a small but comfortable train. The difference in altitude between Curitiba and Paranagua is 900 meters. The steep descent does not allow the train to accelerate to full speed. It's a beautiful but very slow trip that will take us 3.5 hours. The Serra Verde Railroad dates from 1885 and is one of the oldest in Brazil. The rail runs through the mountains of the Atlantic rainforest. It took 13 tunnels, 30 bridges, and several viaducts to conquer the landscape obstacles. This unbelievable display of engineering expertise was finished in only 5 years' time. We're approaching one of the finest bridges of the section, the 55-meter-high Ponte São João. Many a person might feel anxious at the sight of the depths below, but it's nothing compared to what's still ahead. A few kilometers further is the absolute climax of this route, the Cavallo Viaduct, which is extremely high and narrow and hovers above a gaping abyss. As we ride into open coastal area from the dense overgrown rainforest, it's already early in the afternoon. Finally, our Litorina is able to speed up. The last kilometers are at full power. Paranagua is situated 30 kilometers from the ocean at the Bay of Paraná. It is one of the most important ports in the country. The boat to Ilha do Mel leaves from here. We'll conclude our trip through Brazil with a visit to this beautiful island right at the mouth of the bay. The crossing to Ilha do Mel takes 30 minutes. On board it's quiet because we're traveling in October. In summer, however, these boats are packed. Despite the fact that there are many beaches on the mainland, the expansive beaches of Ilha do Mel are the most popular with tourists. Ilha do Mel was not discovered until the 18th century by the Portuguese. Throughout the centuries, it was never really occupied. And even now, just a handful of people live here. The main part of the island is set up as an ecological station. The island and its environment are protected by the government. The ocean, however, has its own way. The island suffers seriously from erosion caused by the driving force of the water. The island has almost been severed into two parts, and more houses are literally on the edge of the abyss. The Portuguese built a fort on Ilha do Mel in 1796 to protect the Bay of Paraná and the ports on the mainland. During the Second World War, the fort became a storage place for weapons. Nowadays, this historical building is mainly a great observation post. With a final glimpse of the ocean, we take a leave from Brazil.